obesity is linked to depression. Obesity is linked to anxiety. Obesity is linked to heart disease, premature death, all these other things. It's like, okay, well, none of those things are good. And then you tell a person who's obese and they've heard this message for 40 years and it hasn't worked. It hasn't resolved anything. Hey, you need to get up and move. Okay, well, no, I don't want to. Versus, hey, here's a way that you can just kind of sit there and potentially lose 14 pounds in a month. What? Yeah, all you have to do is actually contract muscle.
What's up, my friend, and welcome to the Legendary Life Podcast. I'm your host, Ted Rice, health expert and coach to executives, entrepreneurs, and other high-performing professionals. Today, I have another interview for you. My friend, Brad Thorpe, is back on the show. And if you haven't listened to episode 449, The Secret to Longevity, Isometric Training for a Fit, Stronger, and Pain-Free Body, that was the last episode Brad Thorpe was on the show. You're going to want to check that out if you enjoyed today's episode. Again, that previous episode is 449. He's also been on the show a few other times, but that most recent one was 449. And today he is back to talk about isometrics again. And why? Because I don't know if you noticed, but there was isometric training made the news because it was found that isometric training creates a profound lowering of blood pressure in a world where people are maybe over-medicated for blood pressure. And sometimes exercise works, sometimes it doesn't. Isometric training has proved as a powerful method of naturally lowering blood pressure. And that made the news. And Brad reached out to me. He said, Ted, I need to come back on the show. We need to have a conversation about what's going on, the conversation in the media. And so if you heard that conversation, or if you're interested in lowering your blood pressure naturally or avoiding high blood pressure, or just interested in isometrics and how it can help you in your life, because it's one of the key missing components. So you better be interested in isometrics if you're not currently interested in isometrics and longevity is important to you. So we're going to have a conversation about all that and more. Without further ado, let's step into this conversation with my friend, Brad Thorpe. Brad Thorpe, thanks so much for coming back on, man. Great to see you.
It's always great to see you, man. Hope you're enjoying Brazil.
Yeah, it's an interesting time here. Interesting time. They are not into isometric exercise, though. There's a saying that there's a story about shoe salesmen, and I think it was, any developing country, and one comes back and says, "Oh no, it's a terrible market. Nobody wears shoes there." And then the other salesman says, "It's an incredible market. Nobody is wearing shoes," right? So anyway, today we got into contact. We're friends, but you really wanted to come back on the show. Talk about why.
Well, over the last couple of days, there's been a huge push into the world of isometrics. So there was a recent study just put out by the British Journal of Sports Medicine that basically concluded that isometric-based exercise was better than cardiovascular training, resistance training, and high-intensity interval training for lowering blood pressure in a hypertensive population. And as you know, there's over 1 billion people currently globally suffering from hypertension. And after years and years of me butting my head up against a brick wall, it kind of feels really nice to hear those words through national news media, right? Because it was publicly promoted on the BBC as well as CNN. And they basically sort of put this front and center, front page of both their websites and journals and magazines, just sort of elevating this type of exercise that, as you know, I've been been doing this for about, solidly since 2006 is when I jumped down my rabbit hole. So that's a long time to finally get some validation that stems from research going back until 1969 by a guy named Ronald Wiley. And he was a U.S. Air Force scientist who was commissioned, and we're basically, as you sort of said about the Brazilians, so he was commissioned to elevate blood pressure in fighter pilots.
Right.
And they figured, like, here's a way that we can elevate it. And then, sadly, it actually worked the opposite. It actually lowered blood pressure. So for fighter pilots, they sort of said, well, this isn't good. We want them to have higher blood pressure so they don't pass out under G-forces. And then all of a sudden, he sort of stumbled onto this sort of way that you can actually lower blood pressure through isometric-based contractions. And there's actually far exceeds that what you could then see cardiovascularly, as well as through resistance training. And back then, resistance training really wasn't a thing. So he was really kind of competing against this guy, Dr. Kenneth Cooper, who just coined the term aerobics, because he added an S to aerobic. And that was in 1968. And Dr. Kenneth Cooper was a partner in the first commercial treadmill company. And so they started to sort of really promote, basically, you need to do cardio training to improve cardiovascular health. The problem is, since we've been going down that road, it's only gotten worse and worse and worse. So it's nice to finally see some validation for Dr. Ronald Wiley's original research, as well as, I'm not going to lie, I sell and manufacture isometric exercise products. And it's nice to have that sort of out there where people are like, oh, isometrics is actually good for blood pressure, as opposed to the last 30 years, people thought it was what was deemed contraindicated, meaning if you have high blood pressure, you shouldn't be doing isometrics because it would only make it worse. Now, the irony, and this blows my mind, and this is something that's completely overlooked. Let's say you had high blood pressure, then suffered a stroke. You had the misfortune of suffering a stroke. The first thing they do post-stroke is give you isometric exercise in order to help with neuromuscular re-education, because it's safer, it's more effective, and it's more efficient. So pre-stroke, really bad, deemed bad, but post-stroke, this is what we're going to start with. Logically, it makes no sense because their blood pressure wasn't resolved because you had a stroke. It's still usually elevated. It's now you just obviously have a brain injury that's going to take months, if not years, to recover from.
The medical industry is super confused about exercise in general. And if you work with doctors like I have, and I'm sure you've had your share of physician clients, I remember a plastic surgeon, which, the amount of schooling they go through, they have to become doctors, then general surgeons, then specialize in plastic surgeons. Super smart guy, also super big ego. And he was trying to tell me something. He was totally ignorant about it. And I mean, he was friendly, he was just being him. But I said, I'll leave the surgery up to you, but you leave the exercise up to me. Okay.
Well, exactly.
So the study came out and you talked about the history of isometrics, and man, it's just, I'll even say this, Brad, and I think we've had this conversation you've been on the show 3 times. I know you were on episode 420. I know you were on episode number 10, and then one other episode. I can't even find it when I Googled the episodes. But if you're listening right now and you want a little bit more of the background, go to episode 10. If you can go back that far in the archives, or episode 420 as well. But Brad, even when I first met you, and I think it's good to bring this up again, I was training. I believe he was 12 years old, and he suffered an in vitro stroke because the umbilical cord got wrapped around him, something like that. I don't remember all the details. Really good kid, great parents. And I asked in a group we were both in for advice about what to do, because you can't just have him bench press, bro. That's not his hand. The whole side of his body didn't work how a normal body works. And you helped, and you helped a lot. And he got great results as far as he could with my knowledge, what you were able to coach me on. But it was game changing. And it took years for me. Even now, like, I feel good about what you're saying. And I feel like I have a better understanding, nowhere near yours, of course, but about isometrics. But I think it's so hard to bridge the gap between what we think about as exercise versus isometric exercise. I think there's a couple reasons, but what do you have to say?
Well, we try to make things complicated, right? We like dynamic movement is beyond complicated. It's from an orchestration perspective to actually participate in it.
And when you say dynamic movement, just you're talking about squats, push-ups, bench press, anything you can think of.
Yeah, all the way over to the cardio side, like the orchestration of running, elliptical, Stairmaster, just that sequencing of events. And we basically overlook it from a what is actually going on perspective. Like we get hot, we get sweaty, you listen to your music, you watch your TV show. If you're doing cardio, we do everything we can to basically avoid paying attention to what we're actually doing, which in theory should be about creating health, longevity, and wellness. The problem is a lot of this stuff, because it's high repetition, it's limited range of movement or motion, it tends to lead to wear and tear injuries, inflammation, joint stress, tendinopathies, and more importantly, it leads to a general dislike of exercise for most people. And what they end up doing after a stint of, well, I didn't really know what to do at the gym, so my result was crap. So then I basically said, well, it didn't work for me, so I give up on it. And as you know, and as I will, stand on the mountaintops and scream, exercise, when done appropriately, is the most vital thing we can do as humans. But if you do it wrong, if you don't know what to do, it will actually accelerate degenerative change. Why do I say that? Because you can look at it statistically and you can see it across the board. Because what happens is people get injured by it and they stop participating. And that is the root of many diseases, is just because you end up being, for lack of a better word, injured, unmotivated, and you get frustrated. So with the isometric component, because there's virtually zero skill involved in performing an isometric. And for the audience that are unfamiliar with what an isometric is, it's about learning how to create muscle tension within your body with limited to no joint movement. So it's about basically just squeezing your muscles and getting them tight. And there's two different versions of which you can do. You can do what's called a holding isometric muscle action, which is historically known as yielding. And then you have what's called PEMA, which is pushing isometric muscle action, which was historically known as overcoming. And that would be when you're pushing into an object that doesn't move, versus the HEMA, which would be just holding something in space. So that could be a body limb associated with yoga. It could be like you're doing a paused repetition in the dynamic exercise world where you're just holding a weight in space. But both have risks. One has more risks. So if you're looking at the HEMA side of the equation, it actually has more risk because your body, if you're holding a mass, like a weight in space, as you fatigue, that load will actually go up higher, so putting you at risk of injury. Where in a PEMA scenario where you're pushing into something that doesn't move, it's actually going to drop that resistance when you fatigue, because you can't overcome your fatigue state, right, and push greater workloads. So it tends to be a lot safer.
Let's jump in just for a second, just so people can visualize, because I think what the acronyms are helpful. But the HEMA would be something like a wall squat, which we can talk about. That was I saw the research. Or a front plank or a side plank. Those are examples. Or if you bicep curled and held it halfway up, or if you held a push up at the bottom, versus if you tried to deadlift a bar, it went to the squat machine, not squat rack, but Smith machine, loaded up a bar and just tried to pull up against it, but it was loaded with a weight you couldn't move. Or if you try to lift a car, if you've ever, tried to lift a car. I was just thinking about when I was a kid trying to do that, wondering how long it would take for me to get strong enough to actually lift a car. But so what you're saying is the ones where we're trying to lift a car or trying to move the deadlift, the immovable weight, or press against something immovable, those are the safer ones, even though they're better for muscle action and getting stronger.
They're better for muscle action. You'll be able to work on muscle endurance. So the research between HEMA and PEMA, so the HEMA one will actually lead to greater levels of muscle fatigue faster. They're still trying to figure that out, but I just explained why, because that load is actually increasing relative to their fatigue state. And that's not in the research. That's just how you have to understand how physics work. So hopefully they go prove that for me, so I can then hang my hat off that statement. As well as most statements I've said from episode 10 to now, the research has come out validating my comments. So go back and listen to it. I'm going to, because there's been a ton of research come out since then. But you look at that in the HEMA or the PEMA environment. So if I'm pushing on something, like we got to think about what's really at play, that's going on in the body, like things like your tendon, right? The bone structure, the nerve signals, the actual muscle structure itself. So if I'm lifting or if I'm pushing into an immovable object, because I have that ability to sustain the contraction longer, I'm going to actually increase the tendon stiffness. I'm going to increase the bone stiffness. So you think about tendinopathies, or you think about things like osteoporosis or osteopenia, which is basically the thinning of that bone structure. So the PEMA scenario is really good for resolving those issues, right? But, to stay on point with the circulation issue, right, and blood pressure, and why that, isometrics are so good for actually resolving blood pressure, we have to jump over to quick little lesson about sort of the circulatory system. So you have the atrial side, which consists of your heart, your arteries, your capillary networks and stuff like that. And then you have your veins, or the venous system, which is your veins, right? Now, when looking at the two sides, in the arterial side, you have 35% of your blood volume. In your venous side, you have 65% of your blood volume. And we know the one thing that's consistent across the board that everyone in the fitness industry knows and the medical industry knows, how does the blood get back to the heart? And consistently, everyone will always say, well, it's a muscle pump. Cool. Absolutely. 100% it is. Now, the question has to be asked, well, how do we make that system more efficient? Well, the research will show that when you compare dynamic muscle activity, be it concentric and eccentric, to an isometric, the activation rate of a dynamic contraction is 88 or 89%. When you're contracting a muscle isometrically, you have the ability to contract near 100%. So if you're looking at that just at face value and go, okay, well, if I can get about 11 or 12% greater activation out of a muscle, how much do you think from a circulation perspective do you think that's going to improve upon? And the answer is significantly greater. And we see that in the research associated with comparing cardiovascular training, be it resistance training or HIIT or high intensity interval training, to an isometric. I mean, the isometric outperforms all of them for looking at.
For blood pressure.
For blood pressure, yes. Which is the important thing, because that's actually restoring the health of the circulatory system. Like we get caught up with like heart rate and blood, like all of that side of things, but we actually really have to think about, well, how do we influence the return phase? And when you think of creating better levels of muscle tension throughout your entire body, right? So if you think about how your shoulder hangs or your arm hangs from your shoulder, if you increase muscle tension in your deltoid and pec and lat and muscles that would pull upward and drive that humerus, be it that upper arm bone, into what's called your glenoid fossa, which is on your shoulder blade, right? Collectively, it's the glenohumeral joint. So if I can cause better levels of compression there, I instantly create a wider diameter to my artery and my vein, right? So I'm going to reduce the narrowness or the narrow side of that, because by better levels of compression, it increases the diameter of the structure, be it the artery or the vein. And we all know if I can reduce or increase the diameter of that artery, because we've all heard narrowing of arteries is bad. Like we've all heard that.
Right.
Right. And we look and it's like, okay, well, how do we can look at it from two ways. We can actually remove plaque buildup internally, or we can just make the diameter wider. Right. And you can do that through better levels of muscle contractility. And
that's a bit, I think you're doing a great job of explaining it. I think it's a little tough to understand exactly what you're saying, but if I had to put that into words, it's like your arm's hanging And so whenever you pull on a tube, and so you have arteries and veins in your arm and your legs. So if we can, and if your arm's hanging, like if you would stretch any tube, it narrows it. But what you're saying here is that through isometric training, things get a bit tighter, so it's not as loose and it maintains a bigger diameter. So I have a question for you. I know that makes sense in terms of physics. Is that what the research says is the change as well?
Yes, and what they'll see is it's a near instantaneous change. So you will see after one workout that as you increase that contractility or that activation rate of muscle structure, the artery actually, the tissue of the artery wall thickens and the diameter increases, and that's after one workout. So if you now can string several workouts together, you'll start to see a significant difference within a week. And the research that they look at with an isometric is based off, and the protocols that they sort of promoted in the articles and also the research were 4 times 2 minute intervals, right? So 4 repetitions times 2 minutes. And 2 minutes is a long time, and I wouldn't recommend people start there just because it puts people at a little bit more risk. But if we think about that for a second, and they're saying 3 minutes or 3 times a week, right? So that's 24 minutes of committed time per week is what they're recommending. What I would recommend is like daily isometrics. So that way what you can do is get ahead of the curve and you can increase that activation rate of those muscles. So, within a couple of weeks, you're now sort of seeing significant reductions in blood pressure.
So let me jump in here for a second, because I have the study or various aspects of this study pulled up. So this study, or it was actually a meta-analysis. So it looked at 270 exercise studies with over 15,000 participants. And they looked at aerobic exercise, weightlifting. They looked at combined weightlifting and aerobic exercise. They looked at high intensity interval training, and they looked at isometric exercise training and the effects on blood pressure, resting blood pressure. So the aerobic did well. Resistance training was not as good as aerobic. The high intensity interval training didn't do as good as aerobic.
Yeah, it was the worst.
It did the worst. The worst performed the worst. And you look at isometric training and it's like, whoa, that really outperformed. And they use 3 different exercises, or at least I can see 3 different exercises. The hand grip, so they were squeezing something for 2 minutes. What was the protocol? 4 times of 2 minutes on?
Yeah, 4 times 2 minutes, and intensities will range.
What was the rest period on that?
It's usually about a minute in between.
So 2 minutes on, 1 minute off times 4 for hand grip. They did a leg extension exercise and they did wall squats. So 2 minutes on, 1 minute off. Oh, that sucks even thinking about it.
Well, exactly. And, part of my, I had a little rebut to what they put it out there. And, the 2 different news agencies, be it CNN and BBC, they threw in the plank, which wasn't studied at all. And to be honest, I don't think I've ever, in all my research reading, ever read a study on a plank for isometrics for blood pressure, like not one. And I read about 10 studies a day, between 4 and 10.
What is your point in mentioning that?
My point is, I don't want people out there who have blood pressure issues, who may be of poor health, to all of a sudden go out and try a 2-minute plank because they saw it on a news report saying, this is what I have to do, right? Because what will happen is you will end up injured.
Right.
Right. And a wall squat or wall sit is, as bad as a 2-minute interval is, it's a lot safer than a plank, right? A plank, I mean, if you're looking at it going, okay, I don't have, I'm not strong enough to maintain my shoulder integrity. I can't sort of deal with the shear force going against all my spine structures, so all of a sudden you're going to have these people who have high blood pressure. And what happens when people exert force and they have to struggle? They hold their breath. So, there's 2 reasons why I think it's gross negligence on the media. One,
that's the media.
Shocking. I know. It's, that's what they do. It's like, But it's what I think, like, if I look at it positively, they just wanted to put something out there people knew what it was.
Sure.
Where it's like, hey, I have a personal relationship to an isometric. I never thought about it, but everyone knows what a plank is, as opposed to many just like push into something that doesn't move. The difference is it's just such a high risk exercise for anybody new, let alone doing it for 8 minutes on hello.
Right. Your first time, like I wouldn't, well, I might be able to get through. I don't even think I could get through 8 minutes of planking, 2 minutes on, 1 minute off.
And you're in shape.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in pretty good shape. So if you're out of shape, so what Brad's saying, by the way, especially, I'm thinking all the way, like, let's say you're trying to do that plank and you know how you're in a good position, but your shoulders start to, you start to get tired. So you start to hang off your joints, and then your abs and hip flexors, you're getting tired. So your back your low back is starting to sag towards the ground. That's bad for your joints, right? Your muscles are getting the action. It's almost like a separate conversation we need to have about the effects on the joints, which we shouldn't open up that can of worms to. We shouldn't get too crazy with that, but just understand what Brad is saying. You can hurt yourself with isometrics, especially he already differentiated the HEMA versus the PEMA. So the ones where you're just holding a position like a plank or a wall squat versus doing a squat into something immovable, like getting under the Smith machine bar full of weight in kind of a half squat, quarter squat position and just pushing against it.
Yeah, or even better still would be like a leg press.
Oh, a leg press.
Leg press is fantastic. I mean, if for the gym goers.
Talk about how you would do that.
So if you're thinking about like a traditional horizontal leg press, where it's like Cybex or one of those name brands, the selectorized equipment. So they're usually about 250 to 300 pounds. Let's say you're of poor health, not the strongest person. Basically, just bottom out the pin, pick an area which about basically like almost like a seated position, so like a 90-degree hip and knee angle, and then basically just push your legs out, knowing that the goal is not to move the weight. The goal is to push relatively hard. So let's say about 80%, and you can just guess as to what 80% is. It'll be pretty close to, a measured with, data monitoring stuff versus you just guess. Because your brain.
That's what you do in your gym is you put things on clients and measure all that, but you don't have to do that. You can still get the results.
You don't have to do that. And to be honest, the only times we've ever really seen people get injured is actually when we're measuring force outputs. And it's always been males, but they tend to try a lot harder and they're ego driven. They're like, how strong am I? And you can generate so much more force in an isometric scenario than you can in a dynamic scenario. So, isometrics, you do have to be mindful. And that's why I'm a big fan of not measuring, because what it does, it checks the ego right out. Because it's like, I'm going to push as hard as I can. Well, we're not monitoring it, so why bother? Is the traditional thought process. And because also what we want you to do is sustain the contraction for a longer period, right? Like most people, when they're doing testing, it's a 3 to 5 second contraction length at a maximum. It's not, hey, let's do something for 45 seconds and measure all that data points. Or in this case, let's measure it for 2 minutes. There's no real force measurements on 2 minute, sustained isometrics that to be honest, I've never seen that in a study.
So yeah, they just came up, I guess they didn't come up with it. They looked at studies that did that, right?
Well, they so this research was based off Dr. Ronald Wiley. So when he came out with it, he just not speaking to the man, he hacked around to figure out what was the best protocol and did basically all his research then. And he researched this for well over 25 years before they actually came out with a tangible product. And it's not a product plug, but they came out with a thing called Zona. Which is basically,
oh yeah,
right. And we've discussed it before, and I know you know about it. And basically, a dynamometer that it basically gives you a reading, and what you're doing is you're squeezing it, and you hold that for 2 minutes, and it'll give you a perceived an output reading. But you can use a tennis ball for that. At the end of the day, just squeeze a tennis ball. And what they recommended historically with your non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, do it with your left side. Versus your right side. And what they found is your non-dominant hand was actually a better side to actually lower your blood pressure. You could think about your whole muscular system as a tourniquet, right? So if you have asymmetries in joint move or asymmetries in force production, it's just going to it's like twisting a tea towel versus, well, how do you fix that? Well, you just untwist it. And that, and it's a simple way to look at it. But as I said from the beginning, we've complicated this whole thing called exercise so much, where let's just get back to the basics. And the reason that isometrics are so effective, well, an isometric contraction governs all dynamic movement. So when you go to move, you actually have to have an upregulation of isometric muscle tension. So what does that mean? You have to tighten the tendon structure. You have to tighten the muscle before you move. And now this happens at a rate you visually can't see. It's within the first 25 milliseconds. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen because you can't see it, right? And then we'd have to look at, well, muscles, when they generate force, they transmit that force to tendon structure, and that tendon structure then creates movement, right? So it really is really getting on a granular level right to the base of how do muscles work. And so they work isometrically first, dynamically second. So if you don't have that isometric strength or that base level isometric strength, that means your power output's going to be lessened. Your ability to tolerate force is going to be lessened. Your stability is going to be lessened, right? So it puts you at more risk of injury, right? And also, then you look at that and you go, okay, well, sure, muscles, yeah, they transmit force to tendons. And we poo-poo that statement so much. But there's over 4,000 tendons in our body, right? There's about 640 muscles, right? So it's kind of like it's not it's not one muscle and two tendons. It's one muscle and multiple tendons. And tendons, now the cool thing, because we mentioned this a little bit earlier ago, and that about osteoporosis and osteopenia, that tendon structure actually forms the outer surface of the bone structure, right? The only place that tendon doesn't attach to bone is the end, where you have that hyaline cartilage, where you have joint-on-joint contact. Outside of that, the entire bone structure in human tissue, or in humans, is actually covered with tendon structure, which is like mind-blowing, where it's like, okay, here's a way that we can basically help humans resolve blood pressure issues because we're helping transmit force from the muscle to the bone more efficiently, right? And it's kind of like, okay, well, if that happens systemically throughout your entire structure, venous return gets better. Your arteries everywhere within your body increase in diameter. So peripheral resistance, like the amount of pressure that your heart has to encounter, goes down. And it goes down near instant, right? And it's kind of like, wow, that's pretty cool. And it doesn't require any movement, but it does require contraction, right? And that's a thing that we overlook. It's like we got caught up with, we need to move, we need to move, we need to move. We actually need to change that phrase to, we need to contract.
Yeah. Brad, let me jump in for a second, because I know it took me a long time. I was fairly knowledgeable when I first met you and started learning from you. And it was even hard for me to grasp this because of it. It was just so different of a conversation is part of it. It wasn't that like, oh, that's really hard to understand. It's like so different of a conversation. But what Brad is saying, if you're following, is Brad is saying isometrics, you're already doing them. For example, we're maintaining our posture right now. And then when you're doing dynamic exercise, so if you're doing a squat, a deadlift, a bench press too, you have to brace yourself on the bench if you're bench pressing correctly, at least. So you're already doing isometric exercise all the time. It's more fundamental because as soon as you start to move, there's other isometric force needs to happen in other areas of your body to maintain your posture, joint control. So it's really foundational. And then you went a level further, Brad, and talked about how this is affecting the tendons, and the tendons are more extensive than what even medical professionals, well, maybe if they've cut open a cadaver, but like so many professionals, they're not even aware, especially exercise professionals, they're not aware of this stuff. And culturally speaking, we're fascinated by movement. we're starting, I think, to change that a tiny bit, because you'll see people looking at handstands, although that's one of the PEMAs. No, I'm sorry, the HEMAs, the holding isometric. If you see someone doing a handstand or one arm handstand or a planche or some of those gymnastic strength training gymnastics moves or iron crosses or whatever, those are the types of isometrics Brad was talking about, saying that they have more potential for injury versus the ones that are overcoming, or PEMA. And Brad, I would love to get into, I know I've learned so much from you over the years. I incorporate isometric exercise every single day. What would you say for a person? So they just maybe caught whiff of this study. Maybe they have some blood pressure issues, or maybe they just don't want blood pressure issues and they want to improve their health. First of all, do you have a resource that we could send people to? I know you used to have a 30 and 30 or something like that. Do you have a resource?
Yeah, we have. We have an ISOFIT YouTube channel.
Okay.
There's over 15 hours of content where I explain things like isometrics for in this case, isometrics for hypertension. So there's a 45-minute talk on that, which explores the science. It explores what you should be doing to improve upon it. It's obviously a much more blown up conversation than what we've just had. But then we look at things like diastasis recti and postpartum, like for women, and how do isometrics help with that, all the way through to sports performance. So it's an incredible resource. And if you take the time to watch and listen, you'll learn a ton. And then we also have about 200 different isometric exercises that you can look to learn about and copy. And we also have, obviously, our 30 and 30 protocol, which is a 30-minute exercise protocol dedicated to isometrics, which basically takes all the benefit of yoga, weightlifting, and high-intensity interval training and puts it into sort of an action-packed 30-minute isometric exercise routine. So we focus on 10 exercises for your core, 10 exercises for your upper body, and 10 exercises for your lower body. And many of these exercises, like if you don't have an ISOFIT, you can use a towel, you can look around your surroundings, because all an ISOFIT is a fancy wall that obstructs movement. So that's really what it was and what it is. So there's different ways you can use a yoga strap. You can there's a ton of ways you can recreate isometrics. We just made it super convenient and easy. But yeah, from a resource perspective, if you just go to Google on YouTube or go to YouTube and search ISOFIT, and you'll come up with the channel.
I just want to share that because it's spelled ISOPHIT. So ISO PHIT. So it's fit, but it's spelled with a PH, and just a ton of information on there. And I want to say this to you, if you're the type of person who also, I want to say this because I think it's important. We had this discussion before we pressed record. We're really in a state of things where where marketing reigns supreme. Marketing reigns supreme. And even as a fitness professional, I've struggled with this, Brad, over the years. I used to say things and do things on social media or write things on my blog that I knew would get attention, but weren't necessarily in the best interest of my clients. Not that I put out anything too crazy, but I would try to find interesting angles, so I didn't put out anything dangerous, but it was just waste of time stuff. But I thought it would get people interested, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. So more importantly, there's some people who are master marketers. So I started as a personal trainer 24 years ago in Miami Beach, before the internet was a thing and before there was social media at all. And so that's where I come from. And Brad, you've been in this longer than me, but there's the people now who are the most successful, who make the most money, but provide questionable information and certainly get questionable results, are marketers. They're marketers. They're masters of marketing. And I want to say this because I'll air out a bit. I can sense your frustration, at least earlier when we first started talking about something I'm frustrated with. People love the marketing. I've been accused of being too salesy a couple times, not much, but it happens every once in a while. And I'm like, I suck at sales. That's why you think that I'm salesy. Because the people who are masters at it, let me tell you, this is so simple. What I spend my time on? Well, now I'm learning about business, which actually doesn't include that much marketing. But I spend most of my time coaching clients, working with clients, and learning how to get better results with clients. And that's why I'm so great at working with clients. But some of the people who I know who run similar businesses, they don't even work with clients anymore. They just write content. They just create marketing material. And I guarantee you, if you ask the average person, who's a better coach? Is it Ted? Or is it this guy who's got 200,000 followers? They're going to say the follower guy, the influencer guy, which I would crush that person, both with client results and, going up and talking about, just going head to head with client results and what they can accomplish versus me. And it's not that I'm so special. It's just that it's like, who would do better? Some guy playing tennis for 20 years who's trained with pros, or some dude who's, he's not that good, but he's played, but he really focuses on matching outfits and using the best, most coolest equipment. It's like, no, that guy's going to get crushed. He's just going to look. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know if that analogy hits home, but we're in this. So the point is, if you're feeling a bit lost, one of the issues is you're probably succumbing to too much marketing. So get over to ISOFIT, Brad's YouTube channel. It doesn't have, Brad, you only have 300 and something subscribers there. It's like a crime when I see that. Of course, it's up to us as fitness professionals to learn better ways of getting our message out there. But at the same time, if you're listening right now, it's also on you to stop going for the quick fixes. Stop getting so enamored by the new thing and start to focus on the basics. And hey, listen, I'm not even telling you, sorry, I'm going off on a tirade, Brad, but I just got to finish this up. I'm not telling you you must do it. I'm saying if your results suck, then it's probably because the people you're learning from suck, but they're good at marketing. So change up what you're doing if you want better results. All right, I'll step off the preacher pulpit there. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, it's so true. I spend more hours per day reading research than I do marketing. I think that's important to the end result of the client. Whether it's glamorous and sexy. And the interesting thing is, a lot of those people who are those stars and the well-known people within the fitness industry, well, shockingly behind the scenes, a lot of them now have ISOFIT, which is getting kind of cool. Like, we were just labeled Hollywood's newest celebrity workout by Shape Magazine.
All right, we'll talk about that a little bit. I saw that, but so name some names and share the story.
Jason Walsh is a client of mine. He was introduced to us by the head strength coach for the Cleveland Cavaliers, a guy named Derek Millender, right? So Derek introduced Jason to ISOFIT, so I wasn't even present, right? So this is how I market. I take the world's elite trainers and sports coaches, and I make them advocates. Mm-hmm. Because they're paid, they're not paid at all, because they believe that we can help more people with what we're doing. So Derek fell in love with ISOFIT instantly. And within a couple of weeks, we helped Derek overcome some patellar tendon issues that he was having for over a decade.
Wow.
Right? So decade, couple weeks, resolved. So outcomes like that. And here you have a person, and Derek's brilliant, and I absolutely love this man. But what he was doing didn't help him resolve his issue. Introduced ISOFIT. Weeks later, it's resolved.
Who is he working with before?
Well, himself, and basically just doing dynamic exercise.
But he wasn't working with anyone in particular, like some famous trainer.
Oh, no. Derek, so he is the famous trainer.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So Derek was with the Cleveland Cavaliers, basically the world champion. So he's been their head S&C coach for 13 years.
Got it.
And he's super crazy smart. So but what he was missing was isometrics. He did it haphazardly here and there, but until you have it where it's like, okay, I need to actually focus on this. So Derek introduced us to Jason. He's like, man, you got to try this product. This is amazing. It's like transformative. So I get a call basically day of after he introduced it. And Jason's like, I need one of these at my studio out in LA. So he's in West Hollywood. And Jason, I'll talk about the clients that I'm able to use their name because they put it out there publicly.
Sure.
So Zoe Saldana, right? We all know her from Avatar and Guardians of the Galaxy. Then you have Tracy Ellis Ross. So Diana Ross's daughter, who I'm just like, I watched all the Blackish series and I have like this mad crush for this woman because like fanboying, for lack of a better word. She's beautiful. She put that out to 14 million people that she was using IsoFit. And it's like, oh my God. Like, so it's like that level of marketing, I can't pay for and I have no interest in paying for, but it's when people sort of all of a sudden experience it. So those are two of the more well-known stars that use it. There's several more that you know the names, you've seen the movies. I just can't use their names. But if you Google Jason, you see his roster of clients. It's embedded in their programming. So I'm assuming that many of those are now using it. But at the end of the day, so we're 20% of the NBA is using IsoFit now. That's growing. We're now breaking into the English Premier Soccer League. We had an America's Cup team reach out to us to help train for the 37th annual or 37th America's Cup, which is next year in Barcelona. So like this is where it's like, okay, the elite of the elite are calling us. The reason is because it works.
Yeah.
Everybody who uses IsoFit, when they actually use it, not just purchases, gets better. And that better is across the board. Like we helped a lady who had double lung transplant, kidney transplant. We helped her get off blood pressure medication. We helped her basically reduce her insulin dependency by half. So the insulin was within a week. She noticed such a massive difference. And the blood pressure medicine took about a year, and that was medically recommended she get off it. Right. So here you have somebody who is so, I guess, put back together. I don't want to say up for health, but I mean, she had cystic fibrosis and she had a double lung transplant. So she'd monitored her basically since her transplant. She'd monitor her insulin, her blood pressure like daily. And so she basically noticed a huge increase in her physicality within the first little while. So we have many stories of this. We had one lady, she lost 3 dress sizes in 21 days without diet modification, weightlifting, or cardio training. Now, she did have a little bit of weight to lose, but when you start to explore the science of isometrics, what you will see is on a per muscle basis, 30 seconds of isometrics burns the equivalent calories as 30 seconds of maximum sprinting. Right? If you look at that time period, the rationale is because the muscle in an isometric is working the whole time, and in a sprint, it's only working a proportionate period of time. Right? So, for 30 seconds.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I don't think people, like when you talked about the woman who got off her insulin, so she was diabetic, right? To get her to go, okay, we'll go to the gym, do some squats, bro, and do some bench press. You had her do isometric training. And what you just said is so important. I think it's hard to understand because everyone exercises unless they've been taught differently, like an athlete. In other words, do things fast because, 1, 2, 3, 20. Okay, I did my 20 reps. But what we're really after is the muscle activation. And if you're going too quick, the muscle doesn't work that hard. It feels like it works hard. And it does in a way, but the amount of time the muscle's under tension is so different. It's 100% when you're doing an isometric exercise versus the intermittent, like you said, a sprint as an example. I'll probably never run. We'll see. I'm going to get some stem cell injections in my knees later this year, but I'll probably never run a sprint again unless I'm late for a flight. And there's no reason to, unless you love it and you might like life isn't worth living without sprints, but you can totally do it.
There's some significant health. Yeah, there's health benefits to it, but don't start there. Build up to it. Like, I mean, you have to have you you have to have the muscle strength and stiffness to actually tolerate the forces which are high in sprinting, right? So that's why when you look at a sprinter, like 100 meter, like a world-class 100-meter sprinter, those dudes are jacked, and you look at it and go, wow, you want that body. They exert so much force in, sub 10 seconds, right? They cover 100 meters in 10 seconds. Like, that's just crazy amount of force. But on the flip side, they don't, like, that's all they do. Like, I mean, they do lift weights, they do training and stuff like that. But it's about just looking at it going, okay, long term, like, these are rare human beings. Like, these are not your everyday human, right? Like, if you put, Joe Athlete and said, hey, go run 10 100-meter sprints, and that's going to be your training for today, high probability on 3/4 of that first 100, he's already hurt.
Yeah, the hamstring pull, right? It's
hamstring pull, the back issues. Potentially the Achilles tendon goes as soon as he starts. So there's many things. So even though it's healthy and it produces like great results, but you have to look at the force outputs, and especially if you're dealing with somebody who's obese. And if you're going to say, hey, how do I maximize caloric expenditure? Oh, wow, I could go sprint. For an obese person, that might not be ever recommended as safe. And I wouldn't even joke around and say, go do it and go try. It's just going to lead to injury. And you look at it and go, okay, well, if here's a way that we can actually get similar results calorically, well, why don't we just implement this? It's safer. And that's basically 100% contraction, right? So it's maximum contraction isometrically, maximum sprint rate. Just to give you an idea versus, hey, I'm just holding my arms out to the side. I'm now burning the same as sprinting. No, it's high effort isometrics in a PEMA format, right? Where you're pushing into something that doesn't move.
And pushing at what? Like that 80% that you said?
Oh, no, 100%, right? But now recognize your 100 is going to dissipate, right? So because you're going to
probably pretty quickly, right? Based on the energy system, just a few seconds.
Yeah. Fatigue and all that sort of stuff. So it gets interesting. So they actually had, they put out a study and they looked at 5 minutes of intermittent isometric contractions, right? So basically 2 seconds on, 1 second off for 5 minutes.
Okay.
In theory, kind of operating almost like a dynamic workout. But so what they would do, so they'd push. So let's say they in the study, they reached a maximum like effort of, let's say it was 100 pounds, just for easy math. By the time, so they're generating 100 pounds, the first couple repetitions. By the time they're finishing that 5 minutes, they're at about 32 pounds of effort, right? But they're dying at 32, where 100, they were fine, right? So first you got to understand what's 100%. When 100% effort when you're fully energized, or 32 pounds of effort when you're fully depleted, right? So the perceived effort is actually higher at 32 pounds.
It's a really tricky thing to understand, I think, for people, because people think what they feel is real.
Yeah.
If you have someone stay up all night doing shots of tequila and then go into the gym and do their workout, it's going to feel super hard because they're dehydrated, sleep deprived, poisoned with alcohol, but it's not going to lead to better results. It's going to lead to worse results, actually. Well, it may help a little bit, but you're not going to hit any PRs. Right.
And nor should you be trying. Right. So what they noticed in this study, so even though there was a 62% or 68% drop off in workload, the caloric expenditure was the same at 100 and at 32 after this 5 minutes. Yeah. So basically, when you're looking at effort and how we get into almost like a fear response, right? Like you know how you talked about lifting a car earlier, right? So it's like when a mom goes over and she sees that her child's stuck under a car, and she goes over and lifts a car, but she's a 42-year-old, somewhat frail woman, and somehow her body and effort and adrenaline mustered enough force and strength to lift this. Like, cool. So when you add in an element of essentially fear, fatigue, well, your body is now in a different mental and physical state. So maybe your caloric expenditure actually goes up because, obviously 32 pounds to equal the same caloric expenditure as 100 pounds, it had to go up, right? So this is stuff where they just look at and go, why is that happening? And because they haven't figured that out, I'm not going to say that I know either. I'm just going to say that they reported this outcome. And to me, that's really wicked cool. But it's going to get into a fear response. It's going to get into that adrenaline response. To basically just really, that is 100%. Lifting a high weight once, twice, 3 times, that you got so much left in the tank.
I have to jump in because there's one of the things that I do when I get guys who want to train, who join my coaching program, I got a client right now. I take them and they're doing like 5x5 as an example, strong lifts. So 5 reps, 5 sets of 5 reps. I put them on 10 to 20 reps. I make sure that they do. I know for you, you would prefer all ISOFIT exercises, but
I'm biased.
What? Say that again.
I said I'm biased, but it's just because it actually leads to better results.
For sure. I mean, I don't want to get off too much on this tangent, but I incorporate isometrics with all clients, but we have to sell people on the idea of doing it. And that's the difficult part. So I won't say, oh yeah, you know what you're doing? That's a bunch of bullshit. So we're going to do all these things that you've never done before, that only some dude on YouTube with only 300 subscribers recommend, even though you're training some of the best people in the business and pro sports teams. But again, the perception of a person looking in, that's what they think. Like, why isn't he more famous? And that's just, I don't want to get off on the tangent of social media and the facade of it. But so anyway, one of the things that I do is I move them away from those heavier lifts because they burn so little energy and you have to rest so long in between. It's just not a good use. If you're lacking cardiovascular conditioning or lacking conditioning in general, it's not good to lift that way.
No, exactly.
When you're doing the isometric though, you're burning, you're doing nothing but working the muscle and working it until that fatigue point.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we rolled out the 30 and 30 program, right? Because it's all exercises you as a gym goer.
Where can someone get that?
Basically, it's on YouTube.
Oh, it's on YouTube. So just go to that ISOFIT YouTube channel and find the 30 and 30.
Yeah. Personally, I hate subscription models. So it's like, okay, well, we videotaped all this content over COVID. Like we shot over 700 videos over COVID as we were talking.
Incredible. It's all on all 700 videos are on the YouTube?
Not all 700. I mean, I still have to upload a ton of stuff. But yeah, it's, when people will look at it and go, okay, well, it's not the world's most greatest marketed shot video. Like the videos are great. We had a three camera sort of situation with all your little different switchers and four employees. So it's pretty cool. But, we still don't have the audience to justify the continuance of that sort of the media sort of company of what we started. That's not to say that we won't revisit that later. But at the end of the day, it just comes back to, getting the people the knowledge and the confidence to actually try isometrics. Because once you start to try it and you start to go, oh, I don't have that shoulder pain, that back pain, I've lost the weight I've wanted to, then you start going.
And your body doesn't hurt and you're getting in better shape. You feel younger.
Yeah, like all of those things.
You got to call it. You have to start calling it like age reversal something or another, reverse it. That's what's hot right now in the marketing. You got to say this will reverse your age because it's one of the few forms of exercise that actually makes you feel strong and fit, but helps your joints at the same time. It's incredible.
Yeah.
That's why I use it with myself and all my clients.
Oh, I know. And that's why it really comes back down to, belief. And we have to overcome so many beliefs. And most of the people, their belief about exercise, well, they never even studied it. So it literally is this, I heard from my grade 1 physical education teacher or gym teacher that stretching was good for me. It's like, okay, you wouldn't listen to that grade 1 teacher, and it's not a knock towards grade 1 teachers, but I'm not going to take my health advice from that woman anymore. But when I'm in grade 1, maybe I'll listen to her because she's my teacher. But then you find out, oh, she was actually, the math teacher that just covered the class and didn't know anything about exercise, right? So, and, you mentioned your doctor client or your surgeon client earlier. You get a lot of people who think they know what they're doing, trying to be sort of these experts in this field. And, what comes out of my mouth, which shocks everyone, is like, well, how do you know this? I say, well, I just read every day. I'm continually reading stuff. So I'm always upskilling my knowledge base. And, it's like, well, how does isometrics influence, like my post today was, well, how does isometrics influence something like suicide, depression, anxiety? Well, they're now seeing research that sort of ties poor isometric strength in adolescence to increase mental health issues later in life, right? And it's like,
what do you think that has to do with? I mean, obviously kids are out of shape, but why isometric strength, do you think?
I think blood flow to brain.
That's a really good. So the research doesn't know the mechanism right now.
They don't know the mechanism now, yes. However,
but that makes so much sense what you said.
They're now linking it to Alzheimer's disease, right? So if you think about, if you have a suboptimal circulatory system, there's going to be a level of inflammation within your structure. Right. And if you think about what happens with inflammation, you have all these sort of white blood cells, you have everything attacking everything else, right? And it's like, okay, well, that's all circulating and that's getting caught up in your brain structure, right? So what is that going to happen? You think about sort of when you're looking at things like the lymphatic system, right? So get away from the blood flow circulation, right? Lymphatic system, it doesn't have the benefit of having a heart. Right, it's 100% controlled by a muscle function.
Right.
So if you have a suboptimal muscular system because you don't exercise, let's say you're a 13-year-old kid, you happen to be carrying 50 pounds too much, you're not out there anymore playing around, right? So not only do you have the poor isometric strength, you're going to have the compounding factors, less muscle tension on structure. So that means your bones aren't healed, like they aren't growing properly. You're not going to have the same digestion. You're not going to have the same hormonal balance that you should, right? And one of the things that you're thinking about when you're looking at like little kids who are obese or anyone who's obese, they have a blood flow issue to adipose tissue, right? It gets suppressed. And one thing that isometrics does that dynamic exercise does not, it increases blood flow to adipose tissue, right?
Well, I know why does that happen? Do you know?
So during a concentric and eccentric contraction, so the dynamic side, the muscle is contracting and relaxing.
Right.
So you have the blood flow going into the actual desired tissue, which is the muscle, right? You're trying to supply the blood flow to the muscle, bring oxygen to that tissue. If you're looking at more of a cardio-based training protocol, fatigue, walking around generally all day. So what they have sort of seen during an isometric, it actually occludes blood flow to the muscle, right? Which is not good for the muscle. But what happens is they see there's almost about a 700% increase in blood flow to the adipose tissue. And it's on a localized area, right? So which is really, really, really good for enhancing the metabolic activity, getting those hormones, getting those basically lipids out of that structure, right? And it's like, oh, cool. And I stumbled onto that in a heart failure research paper where it's like, oh, okay, I wasn't looking for something to do with weight loss, fat loss more specifically, where it's like, oh, okay, well, they're noticing this. And once again, this is a negative for individuals with heart failures in the sense that we don't want blood flow to be going to adipose tissue. We want blood flow to be going to the muscle. So it's like, okay, cool. Well, maybe if we're going to look at it from that perspective, well, maybe isometrics for that guy with heart failure specifically, maybe we need to approach it slightly different. But for the person who has obesity issues or a metabolic condition, maybe this is the best thing for them, as opposed to telling, somebody with a circumference issue, right? They have a larger circumference, telling them to gyrate down a treadmill when they have no interest in being there in the first place, right? You look at it and go, well, how do we circle back and make exercise more accessible to the larger audience, right? And pun intended, where you're looking at it and go, okay, well, if exercise is done safer, it's more effective, and it's going to produce a better result for somebody who is obese, right? You look at that, obesity is linked to depression, obesity is linked to anxiety, obesity is linked to heart disease, premature death, all these other things. It's like, okay, well, none of those things are good. And then you tell a person who's obese and they've heard this message for 40 years and it hasn't worked. It hasn't resolved anything. Hey, you need to get up and move. Okay, well, no, I don't want to. Versus, hey, here's a way that you can just kind of sit there and potentially lose 14 pounds in a month. What? Yeah, all you have to do is actually contract muscle. Why do I say 14 pounds? Because we had a gentleman in Connecticut who lost 14 pounds doing 1 minute of isometric contractions a day.
1 minute a day.
1 minute a day. He picked 4 directions, and it literally was a trunk flexion, lateral flexion, spinal extension, and lateral flexion to the opposite side. 25 or 15-second contraction. Sorry.
I want to jump in, and plus we're getting a bit long for me. I love talking to you, Brad, and I want to talk to you. Actually, I want to end this and also chat with you after, because I have a few things I want to ask you about that wouldn't be relevant to share here. But just think about what Brad just said: 1 minute a day. How accessible is that for everyone? And it's like, you can get great results with low risk and actually feel better and stronger fast and improve your blood pressure and overall circulation just by doing 1 minute a day of a different isometric exercise. Brad, so here's what I want to finish off with. What's the number one video that someone who's just hearing this for the first time, they haven't heard the other interviews on my show, or maybe they did and it's been a while, right? What's the number one video that you would recommend on there?
Oh, I would tell them to go to my YouTube channel, go to my playlist where it's Zero Velocity Podcast. So we did a video. So as a video vlog, we shot 18 episodes. Start with episode 1, because that's going to give you the foundational understanding of how isometrics is good for a broad spectrum of issues, ranging from sport performance, health and wellness, to how you sort of implement isometrics into your daily strategy.
Cool. And that's on the first episode. So it'll talk about, hey, do this during the day.
Yeah, kind of like, as with anything, start with page 1.
Fair enough.
Actually, more importantly, read the cover. So if you start there.
For the marketing.
Yeah. And so what you end up doing is when you go to like the second video of the series, it's a little bit more specific, and it might be a little bit less relevant for, the masses. But I implore people, hey, if you want to learn about this subject area, whether you're a professional or you're just a general interest person wanting to live a better quality of life, watch the entire series. Maybe not episode 18, because that's about golf.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wait a minute. A ton of people are into, if you are a golfer, do you have one on tennis as well?
No, but your client who you sent me won his tennis tournament basically a day after I spoke with him. And he wasn't even scheduled to play that day. So he signed up and he went and he won his tournament.
Amazing.
Yeah, and you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, sure. You can use his name, Ellie. I don't even remember his last name. Not that I would use it necessarily, but yeah, Ellie.
No, but yeah.
So I got one of my.
Yeah, so Ellie.
Yeah, he ended up. I got him to invest in ISOFIT. Then I referred him to you to work with him on some things.
Yeah, it was funny. So we'll tell the story quickly. So I just did the general reach out to Ellie. Sort of said, hey, how's it going with ISOFIT? You've been a client for a couple months now, and all this. Is like, I'm really not using it. I got back pain and all this. I'm like, dude, what? You got back pain and you have an ISOFIT. Let me spend 5 minutes with you. And you basically, so he had a tennis tournament that weekend, and he wasn't sure if he was going to play because of his back. So he went from not being sure if he was going to play. I spent 10 minutes with him, showed him a couple exercises. He won the tournament.
Amazing.
Played pain-free from back pain, going to skip the tournament to 10 minutes, showed him a couple exercises. He did them that day, the next day, which was his tournament, and he won the tournament. And, then we started talking about golf, and I'm like, yeah, I can help you with golf. That's easy too. And so he goes, really? Come on. So I spent a couple days with him, just like, half an hour type thing over like a 3-day period. And when I came back, he's like, man, I crushed that ball. Like, this is crazy. Like, what is with this? And then he bought a secondary unit for, his cottage or whatever you call that thing, and introduced his family to it. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. That, you take somebody who has, bought product, but, at any point in time, you can buy anything, but if you don't know how to use it properly because you don't have the knowledge or the confidence, right? And that's why we just sort of said, everyone, just here's the information. It's free. Just go ahead and watch it. So it's now the onus is on you because the stuff works. There's no question about it. The results we see defy logic, and people like, you're just trying to sell me. I'm not a marketer. You can attest to this. The reason that we're in 33 countries and have 380 the coolest clients on the planet is because
the results.
Shit works.
Yeah, it works. Yeah. And listen, if you're waiting for this to become really popular and more people talking about it, you're going to be waiting another 10 or 20 years. So don't be that person. This is well, actually the media, I'm not completely correct there because the media is talking about isometrics.
They're starting to. But yeah, there's all that nuance. So listen, Brad, I want to wrap things up because I want to ask you a couple questions, and we're at like an hour 12 at the moment here. But where else would you like someone to go if they're listening? So you got your YouTube channel. Is there anywhere else you'd like someone to go? I'm always on Instagram. So if you send me a message on Instagram, so it's my Instagram handle is Isofit Inventor. So ISOPHIT_inventor. So that's my personal handle. And then the company one is just Isofit, or at Isofit, I guess it is. And their website's isofit.com. You can send us a message through there. You can see what sort of products we're selling. You know, some of our clients, as I said, were in the NBA. So we supply the Philadelphia 76ers. So maybe they had the MVP this year. He's never been the MVP before. James Harden, you know, he led the league in assists. So you just look at some of that stuff and you go, well, can I use their names? The answer is no. Do I assume they're using my product? Maybe, because the team's got multiple units, you know, and we see that across the board with the teams that we're using. A lot of their athletes are basically doing a hell of a lot better than they did previously. And in the older guys' case, they're returning to a younger, more youthful playing style, and they're less injured. It's really, at the end of the day, what I say, it sounds too good to be true, but if it's too good to be true, it must be an Isofit.
I like it. It's not too good to be true. It's just not popular. And a lot of things aren't popular. So anyway, my coaching, that people think that the results I get with my clients, nobody says, it's too good to be true, especially since I show like a 6-month or 12-month transformation, but they think it's more crazy than it actually is. Anyway, that's for another conversation. Brad, love today. Glad we got to connect. Glad we got you back on the show. And I'll have all those resources on the show notes page on the podcast for this episode. All that will be there. But you can go right now, go check out the Isofit YouTube channel and check out Brad's social media as well as his website. Brad, thanks so much. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Thanks, buddy. We'll talk soon.
That wraps up today's episode, my friend. And I want to ask you, what will you do differently after listening to this conversation with Brad? Will you start implementing some of the exercises we talked about? Will you go to his YouTube channel and start perusing some of the isometric exercises, the instructions, how to do them properly? I want to know, what will you take action on? And I want to, again, mention this. Knowledge doesn't create change. Knowledge is not power. It's potential power. You must act on that knowledge. And I want to challenge you, take action on something. It could be anything. It could be something completely different than what you heard on today's show. But listening to this episode today sparked a memory, sparked something inside you. Go take action on that. Until then, we're going to meet on Friday. And this time, I'm going to talk about something that you might be dealing with. In fact, you may have gone to your doctor and had your blood chemistry taken, and your doctor looked at your blood chemistry and said, you know what, everything looks fine. You're super healthy. I mean, you don't feel fine. You got some anxiety, some fatigue, maybe a little depression. Now, nothing that you need to go to a psychologist or psychiatrist about, but you're not feeling your best. And you know your waistline has grown over time. You know your energy level is lower. You know you're not doing your best, but yet your doctor looked at your health, said, everything's okay. On Friday, I'm going to tell you, you're not doing okay. And those symptoms that you're experiencing, they're telling you something. And I'm going to talk to you about what's missing from that conversation in mainstream medicine. And again, this isn't going to be some crazy conspiracy. It's nothing like that. I'm grateful for medical doctors. And if I break my arm or if I get a bacterial infection, you better believe I'm going to the doctor and getting some antibiotics. But if we're talking about health, they're missing something entirely, and you might be suffering as a result. Interested in hearing what that is? Tune in on Friday. Have a great week, and I'll speak to you then. Thank you again for listening to the Legendary Life Podcast. We have some amazing episodes coming your way, so make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you're already subscribed and today's episode hit home for you, please share this episode with someone who you know would benefit from listening. Take care and see you every Monday and Friday in your favorite podcast app.